Welcome, my dear guests, to the captivating expanses of my story. Chapter 11, 2209. Siddha's sun slowly set, bathing the remote valley in a warm, golden light. The shadows of the surrounding mountains grew longer and covered the ground with a dark carpet. A light wind blew through the strange trees, rustling their blue-green leaves. Brother Thales, a tall man with a bald head and piercing gray eyes, led the small group of monks from the Echidna faction deeper into the valley. Their brown robes blew gently in the wind as they walked carefully over the uneven ground. The air was filled with the scent of damp earth and unfamiliar flowers. "Careful, brothers," Thales warned, pointing to a place where the ground was particularly yielding. "The terrain here is treacherous." Sister Ava, a young novice with short black hair, nodded gravely. Her eyes darted vigilantly over the surroundings, constantly looking for signs of unknown life. Suddenly, Brother Elias, a stocky man with a full beard, stopped abruptly. His eyes widened as he stared at something on the ground. "Look!" he exclaimed, pointing to a patch of bright purple vegetation. The group crowded around the discovery. In front of them grew a plant, unlike anything they had ever seen. Its stems were a deep purple, almost black, and wound upwards in elegant spirals. Flowers opened at the tips, their color shifting between violet and an iridescent blue. Thales knelt and took a closer look at the plant. His fingers trembled slightly as he carefully touched one of the stems. "Fascinating," he murmured. "The structure is reminiscent of our helix symbolism." Ava leaned forward as well, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Do you see the fine veins in the petals? They seem to be pulsating." Elias' hands trembled slightly with excitement as he pulled the analyzer out of his pocket. He activated the various sensors with practiced movements and began to scan the strange plant. The display flickered as if it could barely process the unusual data. "The plant seems to generate some kind of bioelectric field," he reported in a calm voice, his eyes wide open. "I've never seen anything like it. The energy signature almost resembles." "No, it can't be." He shook his head in disbelief. Thales' gaze was glued to the plant, his pupils dilated as if he were looking into another world. "Brothers and sisters," he said slowly, carefully choosing each word, "I believe we have discovered something extraordinary. Something that could fundamentally change how we think about life on this planet." He took a deep breath. "Let us call this species Mharin Kharin." The other monks nodded in agreement, eyes full of awe and an almost childlike curiosity. Some murmured silent prayers, and others hastily made notes on their data pads. "We need to take samples," Thales continued, his voice filled with suppressed excitement. His hands involuntarily clenched into fists as if he had to restrain himself from touching the plant immediately. "But extreme caution is required. We don't know what properties this plant has. It could be dangerous, or something much bigger than we can imagine." As the group began to take samples and make notes carefully, Ava couldn't help but notice how intently the eyes of her fellow brothers and sisters rested on the Mharin Kharin. There was something in their fascination that seemed to go beyond mere scholarly interest. The shadows in the valley grew longer, and the purple flowers of the Mharin Kharin began to glow softly in the twilight. The monks of the Echidna faction continued their investigations, caught between scientific curiosity and a strange, almost spiritual reverence for their discovery. The Mharin Kharin spread like wildfire in Khasa's city. The purple flowers suddenly appeared everywhere, in gardens, parks, and even in flower boxes on balconies. But it wasn't just the rapid spread of the plant that attracted attention. Elena Volkov, the colony's administrator, soon noticed subtle changes in the colonists' behavior. The people seemed more relaxed, more peaceful. Conflicts that were otherwise commonplace resolved themselves. There was an almost dreamy atmosphere in the streets of Khasa's city. Elena couldn't put her finger on it, but something was wrong. She called Dr. Lena Novak, the colony's head botanist, into her office. "Doctor, I want a thorough examination of the Mharin Kharin," Elena ordered. Her voice sounded tense. "Something about this plant worries me." Volkov's assistant nodded gravely. "I share your concerns, Administrator. My team has already begun its analysis." In the days that followed, the scientists worked around the clock. Elena received regular updates, but the results were initially unremarkable. The Mharin Kharin seemed to be a harmless, if unusual, plant. Then, on the 10th day of the investigation, Volkov's assistant knocked excitedly on Elena's door. "Administrator, we've discovered something," she gasped, still out of breath from her quick run through the corridors of the administration building. Elena looked up from her datapad. "What have you found?" "The pollen," Volkov's assistant explained. "They are chemically extremely complex. We've never seen anything like it. The molecular structure is... well, it sounds crazy, but it seems to interact with our neurochemistry." Elena frowned, her eyes narrowing into narrow slits. "What does that mean exactly?" "Speak plainly, doctor." "We don't know for sure yet," the assistant replied hesitantly. She ran her fingers nervously through her short, gray hair. "But it could explain why the colonists have behaved so strangely lately. The changes in their neurochemistry could have far-reaching consequences." Elena leaned back in her chair, her face an impenetrable mask of concentration. Her fingers drummed an irregular rhythm on the armrest. After a long, tense moment of thought, she made a decision. "We need to investigate this more thoroughly. But not just here on Siddha's sim. Prepare some samples immediately. I will dispatch a courier ship to Kasach. The best minds in the Empire must look into this." Within a few hectic hours, everything was ready. Elena activated the encrypted subspace link to Asimov, where Emma Hart, Kasach's Minister of Research, stayed. "Emma, we have an extremely volatile situation here," Elena began without beating around the bush, her voice tense. She described in detail the discovery of the Mharin Kharin and the latest worrying findings about their pollen. Emma listened attentively, her eyes sparkling with barely restrained scientific curiosity. "That sounds fascinating, Elena. A plant with such complex properties. Send the samples immediately. I will delegate the research at the main research institute and put all available resources into it." "Be extremely careful, Emma," Elena warned urgently. Her voice had a sharp undertone. "We're in the dark here. We don't know what far-reaching effects this plant could have. Treat it like a highly dangerous pathogen." "Don't worry," Emma assured him with a hint of impatience. "We will, of course, strictly adhere to all safety protocols. But imagine what we could learn from this plant. The potential applications in medicine, neurology." Once the call was over, Elena stared out of her office window at the skyline of Nasa's city. The purple blooms of the Mharin Kharin were everywhere, beautiful yet unsettling. She wondered what the future held for her colony in the Empire of Kasach. The Imperial Senate of Kasach gathered for an extraordinary session on March 5, 2209. The magnificent hall's vaulted ceiling was decorated with intricate mosaics that told the history of the empire. Sunlight streamed through high-arched windows, bathing the room in a warm glow. Imperatrix Saviaheimer was enthroned on her raised seat, her penetrating gaze sweeping over the assembled senators. To her right sat Mharin Gupta, her eyes sparkling with excitement. On her left was Nadine Heimer, her expression as impenetrable as ever. Savia stood up, and the quiet conversations in the hall immediately fell silent. "Honorable members of the Senate," she began, her voice clear and powerful. "We are gathered here today to discuss the introduction of a new tradition to lead our empire into the future." A murmur went through the senators' ranks. Traditions were of great importance in Kasach, they shaped the empires and its citizens' identities. "We have received several proposals," Savia continued. "Each of them represents an important aspect of our society. Let us now listen to the candidates." Mharin Gupta was the first to rise. Her colorful robe stood in stark contrast to the formal robes of the other senators. "Esteemed Imperatrix, esteemed colleagues," she began in a firm voice. "I propose that we establish the tradition of economic development. Let's have an annual day of progress where we recognize innovative projects and economic achievements." Myra's eyes lit up as she continued, "This tradition will spur us on to always strive for improvement. It will encourage inventors and entrepreneurs to break new ground. Imagine how we will honor the best ideas and projects advancing our empire yearly." Murmurs of approval rose in the hall. Many senators nodded appreciatively. Nadine Heimer was the next to rise, her slender figure looking ascetic as ever in the simple robes of the Helix Church. "Dear Imperatrix, colleagues," her voice was quiet but penetrating. "I must object. A tradition that focuses solely on economic progress neglects our spiritual roots. We should instead institute a day of genetic purity to reflect on our divine heritage." A palpable sense of unease spread through the chamber. Some senators shifted uneasily in their seats. Savia listened attentively, her face showing no emotion. When Nadine had finished, the Imperatrix stood up again. Her penetrating gaze swept over the assembly. "Thank you both for your suggestions," she said calmly. "Both aspects, economic development and spiritual tradition, are important for our realm. But in these times of expansion and progress, we must look to the future." She paused, and the tension in the room was palpable. "I have decided to accept Senator Gupta's proposal. The tradition of economic development will lead us into a prosperous future." A murmur went through the hall. Myra beamed with joy while Nadine's expression darkened. The Imperatrix raised her hand to interrupt the emerging discussions. "This new tradition will help us overcome the challenges that lie ahead. It will encourage the inventive and entrepreneurial spirit of our people. At the same time," she said directly to Nadine, "we will not forget where we come from. Our spiritual traditions remain an essential part of our identity." Imperatrix Savia Heimer let her gaze wander over the assembled senators. The decision to introduce the tradition of economic development had provoked mixed reactions. While some senators nodded in agreement, others were reluctant. Myra Gupta could hardly hide her joy. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and she had to pull herself together not to jump up. She could already see in her mind how this new tradition would lead the kingdom of Kasach into a bright future. Nadine Heimer, on the other hand, sat in her seat with a petrified expression. Her disappointment was clear to see, even though she tried to hide it behind a mask of composure. She folded her hands in her lap, her knuckles protruding white, a subtle sign of her inner tension. Paulina Romero rose from her seat, her uniform immaculate and her posture taut. The hall fell silent immediately as she approached the lectern, and her footsteps echoed through the venerable room. "Esteemed Imperatrix, esteemed colleagues," she began, her voice firm and clear. "The situation on our borders is grave. The Rho threat is closing in, and we must act." She activated a hologram showing the Q-turn system. "Our outpost here is vulnerable. I advocate upgrading it to a full-fledged starport. That's the only way to prevent Q-turn from becoming an open gateway for our empire." Murmurs rose in the hall. Senators exchanged worried glances. Paulina continued undisturbed, "The Pegasus flotilla is doing an excellent job, but it needs a safe harbor and supply lines. A starport would provide both." Suddenly, another hologram flickered on, accompanied by a low hum. Emma Hart, connected directly from Asimov, materialized in front of the Senate. Her expression was serious, her eyes red and tired from countless hours of research in the ship's dimly lit laboratory. "Honorable Senators," Emma began hoarsely, "I can only emphatically support Admiral Romero's request." She cleared her throat. "In the last 2 solar systems we have explored, our sensors have registered a worrying increase in the activity of the Rho threat. The data we've collected is more than disturbing." With a wave of her hand, she projected a series of complex diagrams and 3-dimensional sensor recordings into the center of the Senate chamber. The holographic representations pulsed in different colors as Emma continued. "These patterns here and here," she pointed to 2 intersecting lines, "clearly indicate coordinated, purposeful movements. The logical conclusion is that they are expanding. And in our direction." Paulina nodded gratefully at Emma, her eyes sparkling with determination. "As you can now see for yourself, dear colleagues, the meticulously collected data from Asimov confirms our worst fears." She clenched her fist. "An outpost expansion is not only a sensible precaution but an absolute necessity for our empire's long-term security and survival." Imperatrix Savia Heimer leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Paulina and Emma's hologram. "Do you have any specific suggestions for the expansion, Admiral?" Paulina activated another projection. "Yes, Imperatrix. We should equip the starport with state-of-the-art defenses. I also suggest expanding the Pegasus flotilla. New ships, improved sensors, more powerful weaponry." Emma spoke up again. "If I may add, the research data from the Asimov could help develop more effective defense systems. We have gained some interesting insights into the technology of the Rho threat." The Senate was in an uproar. Voices were raised, and questions were asked. Paulina and Emma patiently answered each one, their arguments well-founded and convincing. Finally, Savia Heimer stood up. The room fell silent immediately. "Senators, the situation is serious but not hopeless. We have brave defenders like Admiral Romero and brilliant researchers like Dr. Hart. I put the motion to the vote." The vote was short and precise. The Senate voted unanimously to expand the outpost to starport and extend the Pegasus flotilla. Paulina Romero breathed a sigh of relief. She had achieved her goal, the Empire would be safer. But there was also worry in her eyes. The threat was real, and the battle had only just begun. Andrea Sauer stood on the bridge of the Ptolemy and stared spellbound at the main screen. Before her eyes stretched the barren surface of Vuondurable 4, a planet that appeared to be nothing more than another lifeless oil world at first glance. However, the sensor data told a different story. "Dr. Stern, what do the ground scans say?" asked Andrea, her voice strained with excitement. The Ptolemy's chief geologist was busily typing on his tablet. "Unbelievable, Captain. We've discovered clear traces of an earlier ecosystem. Fossil remains of plants, dried-up riverbeds, even signs of former oceans." Andrea Sauer and Dr. Stern stared spellbound at the main screen of the Ptolemy. The surface of Vuondurable 4 spread out before them, a landscape that seemed both fascinating and desolate. The reddish earth stretched to the horizon, crisscrossed by deep cracks and canyons. Where oceans had once surged, there were now dried-up sea basins, their salty crusts glistening in the faint light of the red dwarf star. "Look there, Captain," said Dr. Stern, pointing to a spot on the edge of the screen. "Those winding lines, they used to be rivers." Andrea nodded silently. Her eyes followed the weathered riverbeds that ran like veins through the barren landscape. In some places, deep ravines had formed, silent witnesses to a bygone era of abundance. "And here," Stern continued as he enlarged the image, "we see the remains of a petrified forest." Before them appeared the ghostly outlines of ancient tree trunks, turned to stone but still recognizable in their form. Strangely shaped rock formations, sculpted by millions of years of wind and erosion, loomed between the fossilized remains. "It's hard to believe that life once existed here," Andrea murmured. Her eyes wandered over the surface, searching for further traces of the past. A mountain range rose in the distance, its jagged peaks jutting into the dusty sky. The traces of former glaciers were clearly visible on their slopes, deep valleys, and sharp ridges, which bore witness to the ice's eroding power. "The atmosphere," said Dr. Stern thoughtfully. "It must have disappeared over time. Perhaps through a catastrophic event, or by a slow, unstoppable process," Andrea finished the sentence. She considered the many possible scenarios that could have led to this outcome. The Ptolemy's sensors recorded further details. Some elevations could have once been coral reefs, now solidified into bizarre rock formations. The fossilized remains of long-extinct creatures lay in dried-up sea basins, their skeletons forever in the rock. "It's like looking into a window of the past," Andrea whispered, overwhelmed by the significance of her discovery. Andrea nodded slowly, her mind racing. So Vuondurable 4 was once a garden world. Fascinating. But what happened? Perhaps a catastrophic event? Speculated Lieutenant Tanaka. An asteroid impact or volcanic activity on a planetary scale? Andrea listened attentively to her crew's theories as she continued to examine the planet's surface. The idea that this desolate world had once been filled with life made her explorer's heart beat faster. "No matter what happened," she finally said, "this planet could be invaluable to Kasach. A terraforming candidate right on our doorstep." She turned to her communications officer. "Lieutenant Garcia, prepare a detailed report for the Imperial Senate. I want every detail of our discovery documented." While the crew eagerly completed their tasks, Andrea retired to her quarters. She activated her recorder and began to dictate. "To the Imperial Senate of Kasach. I, Andrea Sauer, Captain of the Ptolemy, hereby report a discovery of potentially historic significance. In the Vuondurable system, we have found a planet that was once a thriving garden world and now serves as a promising candidate for future terraforming projects." She paused briefly to organize her thoughts. "The opportunities we have here are enormous. We could gain valuable insights into planetary development and the loss of atmospheres and open up a potential new habitat for our people." Andrea continued to dictate the scientific data and preliminary analysis. She emphasized further research and the possible resources needed for a terraforming project. As she finished the report, she leaned back in her chair and gazed out the window at the distant red dwarf, who had given Vuondurable 4 its faint light. The discovery filled her with pride and a deep reverence for the mysteries of the universe. Emma Hart stood at the Asimov observation dome and stared spellbound into the vastness of the Elias system. A cosmic spectacle of breathtaking beauty and overwhelming size unfolded before her. At the center of the system was a huge blue giant star, whose glistening light bathed the surrounding celestial bodies in an unearthly glow. Its surface bubbled and churned like a stormy sea of plasma, enormous prominences shot millions of kilometers into space. 3 mighty gas giants orbited this colossal star in majestic orbits. The outermost was a brown dwarf, its dark surface crisscrossed by swirling storm patterns. Electrical discharges danced in its atmosphere like cosmic lightning. The middle planet shimmered a deep, rich blue. Its rings of ice and rock formed a perfect arc that sparkled like a precious jewel in the light of the giant star. Numerous moons orbited the giant in complex orbits, a fascinating ballet of celestial mechanics. The innermost gas giant was a true spectacle of color. Its turbulent atmosphere displayed a kaleidoscope of ochre tones, purple, and shimmering green. Massive storm systems swept across its surface like brushstrokes, forming and dissolving again in an eternal dance. Between these giants stretched the dense asteroid belt, a chaotic tangle of rocks and chunks of ice. The light of the blue giant refracted in the crystalline structures of some of the asteroids, creating a fascinating glitter and sparkle, as if millions of tiny stars were scattered across the system. In the distance, beyond the planetary orbits, the edge of a vast molecular cloud could be seen. Its swirling masses of gas shimmered in delicate pastel shades, streaked with dark streaks of dust. New stars were forming at its edges, their birth marked by bright points of light in the cosmic darkness. Emma couldn't take her eyes off the sight. The Elias system was a masterpiece of nature, a perfect composition of light, color, and movement. Every new angle revealed new details, new wonders. "Dr. Novak," she whispered without looking away, "have you ever seen anything more beautiful?" The chief scientist stepped up next to her, his eyes equally captivated by the panorama before them. "In all my years of research." "No, Commander. This surpasses everything." For a moment, the Asimov's bridge was silent. The crew stood spellbound, united in silent admiration for the majestic splendor of the cosmos. The gentle hum of the ship's systems provided the only background sound to this sublime moment. "Dr. Novak, what do the scans say?" Emma finally asked, her voice strained with excitement and scientific curiosity. The chief scientist leaned over his console and typed busily on his tablet. His eyes flitted over the incoming data streams. "Fascinating, Commander. We've detected an anomaly on one of the asteroids. The data is unusual. I've never seen anything like it." Emma stepped closer to the central console, her heart pounding with anticipation. "Show me, Dr. Novak. Every detail could be important." The large primary screen showed a magnified view of what, at first glance, appeared to be an unremarkable asteroid. But in the middle of the jagged, rocky surface, something loomed that didn't belong there, a perfectly shaped, jet-black monolith. Its smooth surface stood in stark contrast to the chaotic surroundings of the asteroid field. "Is that?" Emma's breath caught, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Yes, Commander," Novak confirmed with awe and scientific enthusiasm. "An artificial object. Not of natural origin. The scans show a perfect geometric shape and a material completely unknown to our sensors." The bridge was filled with excited murmuring. Emma raised her hand to command comm. "Lieutenant Chen, map the exact position. Dr. Novak, I want a full scan. Don't leave out any details." Emma stared at the monolith while the crew eagerly carried out the orders. Its smooth, black surface seemed to swallow up the light from the blue giant. "What are you?" she murmured. After a few minutes, Novak spoke up again. "Scan complete, Commander. The object is made of an unknown material. Our sensors can't penetrate it. There are no recognizable openings or markings." Emma nodded slowly. "A perfect puzzle." Lieutenant Garcia prepared an encrypted report for the Imperial Senate. "Mark it as a top priority." She turned to her crew. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just made history. The first discovery of an alien artifact in the Elias system. Our job now is to keep this secret until we know more." Andrea Sauer stood on the bridge of the Ptolemy, her eyes fixed on the three-dimensional star chart before her. The Vu-undurable system shrank to a tiny dot of light at the edge of the projection, its secrets now carefully stored in the ship's quantum memories. A tingle of excitement ran through her as she thought of the groundbreaking discoveries she and her crew had made there. The taste of triumph mingled with the bittersweet flavor of curiosity on her lips. "Set a course for the CDNC system, Lieutenant Tanaka," Andrea ordered, her voice firm and determined. She watched her navigator's eyebrows raise slightly, a subtle sign of surprise that Andrea did not miss. "Not Bonawaryak, ma'am?" asked Yuki Tanaka cautiously. Her fingers hovered over the holographic controls, ready to carry out the order but hesitant. Andrea shook her head, a trace of frustration flitting across her face. "New orders from Fleet Command. We are to proceed directly to CDNC. It seems the Imperial Senate has other plans for us," she sighed softly before adding, "that means we're going to quickly sweep the Bonawaryak system. Keep the sensors armed, Lieutenant. Who knows what we might discover with even a cursory glance." While the Ptolemy prepared for the hyperspace jump, the Apsu system was bustling with activity. The Belarus, a colossal construction ship, glided majestically out of hyperspace. Its kilometer-long silhouette stood out against the pulsating neutron star. Captain Olga Petrov stood on the bridge, watching the cosmic spectacle with awe and caution. The rhythmic flashes of light from the star were reflected in her watchful eyes. "Begin preparations for the new resource extraction facilities," she instructed her crew in a firm voice. "We have a lot to do, and the conditions here are anything but ideal. Any mistake could have fatal consequences." Yelena Voronin, the chief engineer, nodded grimly. Her fingers flew over the control panels as she made the first diagnosis. "The radiation levels exceed our limits tenfold, Captain. We will have to take additional protective measures. The shields are holding for now, but in the long run." The crew of the Susquehanna gave the Belarus the equivalent of a booming horn salute as it made its way into the Vuongurable system. The deep hum echoed through the etheric space and caused the Belarus sensors to go off. On board the Susquehanna, everyone was feverishly preparing for their upcoming mission. In her quarters, Captain Lena Schultz was studying the holographic plans for the new outpost to be established in December. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she went through the complex schematics and identified potential weak points. "This is going to be a challenge," she muttered through the complex schematics. "But that's exactly what we're here for." The Imperial Senate was in session on Kosch. Imperatrix Savia Heimer listened attentively to the reports of the various fleet commanders. The coordinated movement of the ships was a balancing act of strategic considerations and scientific curiosity. "The Ptolemy will provide valuable data from the CDNC system," Admiral Romero explained. "At the same time, the Belarus and the Susquehanna operations will secure our resources and expand our sphere of influence." Savia nodded thoughtfully. The Empire's expansion was progressing, but she knew every new step into the unknown could bring new dangers. She thought of the ship crews bravely venturing into the vastness of space and hoped that their decisions would guide them all safely through the challenges ahead. Hana Hussein stood spellbound in front of the holographic projection of the Q-turn system. Her eyes followed the elegant movements of the so-called Sade thread as it moved majestically through space. The faint light of the orange dwarf star bathed the control room in an eerie twilight and made the contours of the creatures appear even more fascinating. Hana Hussein watched the spectacle before her eyes, spellbound. The Sade, these enormous creatures reminiscent of cosmic whales, moved in perfect harmony around the gas giant Q-turn V. Their shimmering bodies reflected the subdued light of the orange dwarf star and bathed space in a surreal play of colors. The largest of the creatures, a colossus at least 10 kilometers long, glided majestically ahead. Like the lead bull of a herd of elephants, it pulled the others behind it. Its tentacles, which spread like living solar sails in the cosmic wind, pulsed in a rhythmic pattern. The smaller Sade followed in a V formation, like a flock of migratory birds on their long journey through the galaxy. When they reached the outer layers of Q-turn V's atmosphere, the Sade began their mesmerizing dance. Their bodies undulated in a complex choreography as they absorbed the giant's gases. Hana realized this was not a chaotic feeding frenzy but a precise, almost ceremonial ritual. The younger, smaller Sade hovered at the edge of the group, mimicking the movements of their elders. It reminded Hana of whale cubs learning the art of filter feeding plankton from their mothers. The parallels to earthly nature were astounding and yet so strange. Suddenly, one of the Sade emitted a call, a wave of energy that caused Hana's sensors to vibrate. The others responded, a cosmic concerto of unimaginable beauty and complexity. The air in the control room seemed to crackle as if the sounds bridged the space between the stars. Hana watched in fascination as the group moved slowly around the gas giant, always in perfect formation. Like whales rising and falling in the ocean's depths, the Sade glided effortlessly through the various atmospheric layers. Their movements were so precise and coordinated that dismissing them as random or spontaneous seemed impossible. "This isn't a threat," Hana murmured to herself. "It's a miracle." She zoomed in on the holograms and recognized fine details on the creature's skin. Complex patterns, almost like characters, pulsed across their bodies in changing colors. Was this a form of communication? Or perhaps an expression of their feelings, like the changing colors of an octopus? The Sade was now moving in a spiral formation around Quturn Vi, a living galaxy of bioluminescent bodies. Their dance became faster and more intense as if they wanted to draw the last remnants of the gases they needed from the planet's atmosphere. "Fascinating," Hana murmured and stepped closer to the projection. She saw the delicate tentacles spreading like living solar sails in the cosmic wind. The creatures seemed to communicate, their bodies flickering in complex patterns Hana could not yet decipher. A soft beeping drew her attention to one of the monitors. The data showed that the creatures were approaching the hyperlane to the Whaledi system. Hana held her breath as the first of the 7 creatures reached the jump point. In a flash of energy, it disappeared, followed by the others. "Note the time," Hana instructed her assistant. "September 25, 2209, 1537 Standard Time. The last of the creatures has left the Quturn system." She leaned back and rubbed her chin thoughtfully. The Sade, as they were tentatively called, had proven peaceful. Their journey through the Kasach Empire had been uneventful, but the implications of their existence were enormous. Hana turned to the window and gazed out into the vastness of space. The Quturn system now lay silent before her, the gas giants continuing to orbit their star as if nothing had happened. But for a brief moment, she had witnessed an extraordinary encounter. "Prepare a detailed report," Hana said to her team. "The Imperial Senate will want to know every detail. I would add my recommendation, we should not see these beings as a threat but as an opportunity. A chance to expand our understanding of the universe." As the crew busily carried out their tasks, Hana's mind wandered to the possibilities of this discovery. The Sade had shown that life in space was more diverse than they had ever imagined. And who knew what secrets were still waiting to be discovered? Joanna Fritsch stood on the observation deck of the Asimov and stared out into the vastness of space. Her eyes fixed on a distant point where she knew the Bobo system was located. She had been working tirelessly for weeks to contact the so-called Rho threat, but her efforts had been unsuccessful so far. The diplomat sighed softly and rubbed her tired eyes. The tension of the last few days had dug deep furrows into her face, and her ordinarily alert eyes looked dull and exhausted. Joanna couldn't help but think of Emma Hart's report, which had confirmed the existence of an imposing starbase in the Bobo system. This information had turned their already challenging task into a race against time. "Do we have any new findings from the long-range sensors?" she asked her aide, who entered the observation deck with quick steps. His posture betrayed a mixture of curiosity and concern. Her adjutant shook his head regretfully, his eyes reflecting the frustration that Joanna was also feeling. "Nothing new, I'm afraid, Joanna. The starbase continues to pulse with activity, but we haven't been able to make out any further details. It's as if she's deliberately keeping us in the dark." Joanna nodded thoughtfully, her fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the arm of her chair. Uncertainty gnawed at her like a hungry predator. Were these creatures peaceful inhabitants of the intergalactic spheres, ready for an exchange at eye level? Or was there a deadly threat to the Empire lurking behind the facade of their formidable construction? The question hung over them like a sword of Damocles, stirring up increasing unrest. Not only here, in the narrow corridors of Asimov, but also the spacious halls of the Imperial Senate on Kasach, the growing tension was palpable. The atmosphere in the Imperial Senate on Kasach was tense. The senators debated the possible implications of this mysterious presence in their neighborhood. Some called for immediate military action, while others urged caution and diplomacy. Imperatrix Savia Heimer listened attentively to the arguments, her face a mask of concentration. She knew the decisions she would make in the coming days could have far-reaching consequences. "We must decipher their language," Savia finally explained, her voice cutting through the tumult like a laser scalpel. The senators fell silent instantly, their gazes fixed on the Imperatrix. "Only by understanding what they say can we fathom their true intentions. Without communication, we are groping in the dark, dangerously close to the precipice of intergalactic conflict. Myra Gupta, sitting next to the Imperatrix, nodded in agreement. Her eyes sparkled with determination. I suggest we put all available resources at Joanna Fritch's disposal. If anyone can make a breakthrough, it's her. Her xenolinguistic skills are second to none, and her intuition for alien communication patterns is uncanny. In a windowless room full of buzzing analyzers and flickering holograms in the Foreign Ministry, Joanna worked feverishly on new approaches to establishing contact. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she meticulously examined every signal, no matter how small, every anomaly in the scans of the starbase. Complex linguistic patterns formed in her mind, merging with mathematical equations. She desperately hoped to find the key to break the barrier between the species and make communication possible. The days merged into a single, endless stream of data and hypotheses. The tension in the Foreign Ministry grew with every passing hour. In the eyes of her colleagues, Joanna saw the unspoken truth: not only the fate of the Empire but possibly that of the entire galaxy depended on her success or failure. The diplomat felt the weight of this cosmic responsibility on her shoulders like a crushing gravitational field. But instead of paralyzing her, it ignited a fire of determination within her. She would not give up, not as long as there was still a spark of hope for understanding. The starport in the Q-turn system loomed like an enormous web of metal and light in the blackness of space. Its intricate structures stretched for kilometers, a labyrinth of docks, hangars, and research modules. In the center was the massive command center, surrounded by pulsing energy conduits and shimmering force fields. Camilla Roswell stood on the observation deck of the central control tower and watched the hustle and bustle around her. Shuttles and maintenance drones flitted like glowing insects between the station's booms and struts. In the distance, the stars of the Q-turn system glittered, including the orange dwarf that gave this sector its name. Roswell felt the vibrations of the generators through the floor. The starport hummed with activity, a living organism of steel and energy. Technicians hurried through the corridors, scientists consulted in the laboratories, and security personnel patrolled the sectors vigilantly. In the distance, beyond the protective shields, hovered the hostile worlds of the Q-turn system. Q-turn-I, a molten hell, glistened in the central star's light. Q-turn 2 and 3, barren wastelands, were little more than dark shadows in the sky. The vast asteroid belt stretched between them, in which the dwarf planets RMK 1773, QL 77837, and MW 1423 trace their lonely orbits. The starport was more than just a military facility. It was a beacon of civilization amid the cosmic wilderness, an outpost of the Empire of Kasach on the threshold of the unknown. From here, expeditions would set out into unexplored systems, trade routes would be secured, and the Empire's borders would be defended. Camilla Roswell took a deep breath. The responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she also felt the pride and determination that every officer and crew member on this station exuded. They all knew they were part of something bigger, a mission transcending personal ambition. Turning away from the view, Roswell's attention turned to the floating image of the region. The starways to Eurasia and Weyaliti shimmered like vital links of the cosmos. The space station acted as a central hub, uniting and shielding these systems. On the 4th day of December, 2209, the space bastion in the Q-turn system shone in all its glory. As soon as the final connections had cooled down, Fleet Leader Paulina Romero moved on to the next phase. With indomitable willpower in her voice, she activated the communication device. Station Commander Roswell, report in, Romero demanded gruffly, her eyes fixed on the flickering projection. The recently appointed head of the space fortress, Camilla Roswell, materialized in the azure light. At your command, Fleet Commander, she replied tersely, her posture taut and alert. Romero wasted no time with pleasantries. The starport must be developed into a fleet base immediately. We're adding 2 modules, a shipyard facility and a target coordination computer system. Roswell nodded briefly, her eyes narrowing slightly as she thought through the implications. Understood, Admiral. The shipyard will increase our striking power considerably. And the targeting coordination system. A wise precaution, given recent developments. Accurately captured, Commander, Romero replied, a hint of appreciation in her voice. Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of respect and caution. The situation is tenser than ever. We must be prepared for every eventuality, from diplomatic entanglements to outright confrontation. Roswell hesitated briefly, her fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the console before her. Then she ventured a question, her voice quiet but firm. "Admiral, do you expect a conflict with the Almoran soon? The rumors among the crew. They are disturbing?" Romero's face hardened, and deep furrows dug into her brow. "We're hoping for the best, Commander, but we're preparing for the worst. The Rho threat is real, more tangible than many want to admit. And we damn well won't be unprepared when they strike." "Understood," Roswell nodded, her posture tightening noticeably. "We'll begin preparations immediately. The shipyard will be given absolute priority. I will personally coordinate the work shifts." "Good," Romero growled, her voice like steel. "I expect detailed, daily progress reports. Any delay or anomaly must be reported immediately. The Q-turn starport will be our bulwark against the lurking darkness out there, a protective shield for Kasach. Failure is not an option, Commander. Not here, not now." "Yes, Admiral," Roswell replied, her voice filled with steely determination. Her eyes burned with the fire of duty. "We will not let you down. Q-turn will become an impregnable fortress, whatever the cost." When the hologram went out, Romero turned to the viewport. Her gaze wandered over the glittering stars as her thoughts drifted to the potential dangers lurking in the depths of space. The Q-turn starport was more than just a military installation, it was a symbol of the strength and resolve of the Empire of Kasach. Roswell, now alone on the command bridge of the starport, activated station-wide communications. "To all units, Priority 1 is expanding our shipyard facility. Shift schedules are being adjusted, and all available resources are being diverted. We have a clear mission, and we will fulfill it. For Kasach." The crew responded with a collective "for Kasach." Their voices echoed through the corridors of the starport. Work began immediately, the hum of the machines and the hiss of the welding equipment filled the air. Hey, I would be happy if you could give my video a like, leave a comment and subscribe to my channel to stay up to date.